Can we stop doing this? Can we stop calling the Federal Reserve a private institution, a private corporation, and a private bank? Look, I understand that misinformation spreads faster than information, and that is one of the major problems we have nowadays. But let's set the record straight because it's important. And the Federal Reserve is structured the way that it is on purpose. Okay, so first and foremost, why do people call the Federal Reserve a private institution? Well, it's because of a misunderstanding, primarily, of how it's structured and because it does resemble a private institution. So the Federal Reserve resembles a private institution primarily in two main ways. The first is that it does provide dividends. Okay, when people hear dividends, they think of private or public, as in publicly traded companies. The thing is, the dividends that it provides are to member banks. Okay, so the Federal Reserve provides a 6% per year dividend to member banks on the money that they hold in the Federal Reserve. This, when you actually break it down, seems fair. These banks are required to hold money in the Federal Reserve, and in return, they are given a 6% dividend, which is designed to beat inflation and provide a slight profit. That is, I think, the primary reason why people think the Federal Reserve is a private corporation. The second is that it acts independently of pretty much any branch of the United States government, right? Inside the government, we have checks and balances, and we have three different branches of government that are designed to balance each other out. The Federal Reserve, for the most part, operates outside of that scope, although there are limitations. So let's talk about that. So first and foremost, the Federal Reserve was created by an act of Congress, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. That already kind of sort of seems like there must be some sort of government influence. Secondly, and I think this is a very important one, I don't think anyone really talks about this. If the Federal Reserve makes a profit above the 6% dividend that it pays member banks and above operating costs, where does that profit go? Does it go to investors? No, it goes to the U.S. Treasury. In fact, this is required by law that all profits above the dividend and operating costs are sent to the United States Treasury. That again seems to symbolize like there is some sort of government control. Not only that, but the Fed chair, for example, right now that is Jerome Powell. Who picks the Fed chair? Well, it is chosen by the president. In fact, Jerome Powell was chosen by Donald Trump, and then it is confirmed by Congress. So the leader of the Federal Reserve is appointed or chosen by the president, the current sitting president at the time, and then it is confirmed by Congress. Now, here is where the separation of the Federal Reserve comes into play, and we'll explain why. So first and foremost, there has been a feud, an ongoing feud between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell, and really it's a one-way feud from Donald Trump to Jerome Powell, which is funny to me because Donald Trump appointed Jerome Powell. But Trump has said multiple times that he thinks Jerome Powell should be fired, that he wants to fire Jerome Powell. He's even said that if he really wanted him out of there, he would be out of there. Well, it seems like he wants him out of there. So why is he not out of there? And then on the flip side, you see Jerome Powell, he's been asked directly if Donald Trump asked him to step down, would he? And he said no. And then he said not permitted under the law. Okay? The reason for this is because the Fed chair can only be removed for cause. Now, cause is a broad definition, but in reality or under the courts, it would likely be taken as either gross negligence or mismanagement, or basically the Fed chair acting against the Federal Reserve's dual mandate. What is their dual mandate? Maximum employment and price stability. Okay? In this case, they want 2% inflation, which on a complete tangent, where do you think that 2% target rate comes from? Is it some mathematical formula? Is it a bunch of, scientists, high-end scientists that are doing the mathematical, or economists that are doing the mathematical formula to figure out the best rate? No, it comes from an interview in 1989. A New Zealand economist said that we should target 2% inflation on an interview on television, and we've stuck with it ever since. So you would think that there'd be some drastic formula. There's not. It's just enough that it keeps the economy growing, and there's enough buffer zone that we don't move into deflationary territory. But the fact of the matter is, most people feel like it's a private institution because there are certain things that seem like it's a private institution, and the Federal Reserve acts mostly outside of the scope of the U.S. government. Here's the thing, though. At any moment, the U.S. government, primarily Congress, could enact a law to disband the Federal Reserve or change it in some way. Okay, so it still does operate under some sort of governmental control. And most people, the most accurate, when you ask people who understand this stuff, and I agree myself, the most accurate definition of this is it is either your best bet would be to consider it a hybrid institution, as in it has some public, some private components, or better, in my opinion, would be an independent governmental organization, as in it is a government organization, but it acts independently of the government. Okay, now let's answer the question, why? Because Trump himself has said that he would like more control over the money supply, right? The fact of the matter is, as a U.S. citizen, as an American, and as a consumer, you do not want either political party, Democrat or Republican, okay? You do not want the president or Congress to have direct control of the money supply, because what you are going to end up with is a vicious cycle of high and low interest rates. You're basically going to get whatever political party is in charge, they're going to manipulate the interest rates during election season to make the economy, the stock market, and everything else do well so they are reelected. This would be a detrimental cycle of ups and downs, high interest rates, low interest rate, high interest rate, low interest rates, every time there's an election. That is not what you want. So by separating the money supply and making it somewhat insulated, they're not as insulated perhaps as the judiciary branch, which, the Supreme Court, their tenure on the bench is for life. Now, the Federal Reserve Chair, for example, does not serve a life tenure, but they serve 4-year terms for the Federal Reserve Chairman, and then the Federal Reserve governors serve 14-year terms. This is primarily to insulate them from political pressure. And it's also designed so where the president or Congress cannot just remove them unilaterally for no reason. And that is primarily a good thing. So when people say that the Federal Reserve is some evil institution, I think, unfortunately, we live in a world, and because of the internet, we live in misinformation is very powerful. And conspiracy theories are very powerful because they sound more interesting. They garner more clicks, right? So those things are what ends up being propagated across the internet, when in reality, the facts might be a little different. Is the Federal Reserve some evil institution? I genuinely, if you're asking me, no, I don't think so. Is Jerome Powell an evil man? I don't think so. I think that when you look at his past behaviors, and here's the thing, I don't agree with everything he's done. I think the Federal Reserve is constantly late to the game when it comes to changing interest rates up or down. And Jerome Powell is and has been late to the game when it comes to making those decisions. But when you look at their decisions, they have primarily been data-driven. And one of the reasons why they lag sometimes is because they're data-driven, because they wait for the CPI inflation reports, the CPE inflation reports, and the jobs reports to make those decisions. And those reports are usually a couple weeks, if not a month, behind. So do I think that the Federal Reserve is acting as it should? I do. Do I think that I would prefer to see the Federal Reserve completely controlled by the government? Absolutely not. Because of our politics. I think it needs to remain separate, and I hope this video was enlightening and informative when it comes to how the Federal Reserve is structured, because this is a myth, a misunderstanding, misinformation, whatever you want to call it. This is just something that I see all over the place, and the Federal Reserve is not a private company or a bank or an institution. It is at most a hybrid institution, and in reality it's more so an independent governmental organization. If you like personal finance, world economics, and investing broken down as simply as they can be, you are in the right place. If you like this casual, more chill, no real edits style of talking about finance, investing, and world economics, then you are in the right place. If you want a more structured, more edits, more graphs on the screen, then I definitely suggest that you check out the main channel, just my name, Derek Polishek. And on there, we do much more structured videos. Those come out every single week. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.